Good afternoon and welcome to Engage for Success radio show number 596, how to motivate and connect with others. And today we're going to be talking about how to motivate people. I'm Jo Dodds, your host for today. I'm an engagement consultant working within the Engage for Success core team. The Engage for Success movement is an inclusive movement committed to the idea that there is a better way to work by releasing more of the capability and potential of people at work. We spread the word about employee engagement and shine a light on good practice, inspiring people and workplaces to thrive. And we're widely supported across the UK, involving the public, private and third sectors. If you go to engageforsuccess.org, you can use the link at the bottom of the page to join our newsletter list, and all our social media links are there too. So my guest today is Catherine Stothart, who's a leadership coach and author. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Jo. It's really nice to be here.
And in our little preamble, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your surname, so I hope I did it all right.
Pretty well, yes, Stothart. Just how it's spelt, yeah.
Okay, Stothart. Oh, very good. Lovely, excellent. So start by telling us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm a leadership coach. I work with Airbus. I live in Chester, just down the road from where they make the wings for the Airbus aircraft. And I've also worked with Google and Audi and lots of other organisations over the years. Started my career in HR in Ford Motor Company. Then I moved to Mercury Communications, who were the first company allowed to compete with British Telecom. And then I went to ICL, which is now owned by Fujitsu. Then I had a career break and went abroad because of my husband's job, and we lived in Egypt and Brazil. Came back from Brazil about 20 odd years ago now, set up my own business as a coach, and now I'm an author as well. And I've got 2 books published. One is How to Get On With Anyone, Even the Difficult Ones, published by Pearson. And the other one is Motivation, The Ultimate Guide to Leading Your Team, published by Routledge. And both of them, of course, are relevant to sort of managing and engaging people.
Yes, yeah, lovely. So we said we're going to talk in this show very much about motivation. So I don't know, shall we start by defining what it is?
Yeah, okay. I mean, in a nutshell, it's really what gets you up in the morning. You know, it's why you do, what makes you act. And some of that, of course, is about the external rewards and demands on you. You know, we all have to get up and go to work and earn money and so on. But a lot of motivation is about intrinsic motivation, your own inner needs and that drive to fulfill them, and feeling that what you do is worthwhile. And that's the biggest motivator, really. If you look at the academic theory, motivation has got 3 elements. It's about having a sense of purpose, but it's also about how hard you try and how long you keep trying for. In other words, persistence and resilience. And managers can influence all 3 of those areas, purpose, persistence, and resilience, by how they engage and communicate with people. So a quick example. How you give feedback will influence whether people persist and are resilient. You know, you can give feedback in a way that undermines people's confidence and then they don't perform so well, or you can give feedback in a way that encourages them and supports them, and then they carry on, you know, they persist for longer and they perform better. But I thought today we've only got a small amount of time, so maybe we should focus on purpose.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so I'll say a little bit more quickly about purpose. So having that sense of purpose is really important. And you probably know that Simon Sinek has got a book about the need for purpose. I think it's called Find Your Why. I talk about 2 types of purpose. The purpose that having your job gives you. You know, you have a job, you have a role that fits into your team and into your organization, and that gives you a sense of purpose. But you also get a sense of purpose for fulfilling your core needs. So we all, as human beings, we all have core needs for autonomy, you know, to have some freedom, for competence and to feel that we're respected for our talents, and for connection with others. You know, belonging is really important. Human beings are social animals. And we know that, you know, when people retire, they often lose their sense of purpose. And they often go back to work, actually, or find other things to do. So meeting these core needs not only motivates you, but it's actually good for your well-being as well. You know, if you can meet your needs for connection, competence and freedom, then you are going to be probably have greater well-being as well as being motivated.
Yes, okay. So you talked about managers being able to influence those areas, the purpose, persistence, and resilience.
Mm.
And we're talking about, whether, well, we're talking about motivation.
Mm.
And you've talked about motivation being intrinsic. So can we actually motivate other people? I mean, we talk about that a lot with managers, but is that possible?
Well, the way I look at it is that as a manager, you can create the conditions at work that make it more likely that people will feel motivated. So, if you as a manager can make people feel that they have a sense of purpose in their work and give them opportunities to fulfill those needs for competence, connection, and autonomy, then you're creating those conditions. You're creating the right environment that gives them much more chance of being motivated or self-motivated, because you're giving them those opportunities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so we've sort of talked about purpose and meaning. What can managers do to create that? We talk in the Engage for Success 4 enablers about having a strong strategic narrative, and one of the roles of an engaging manager is to connect people to that, so that they have that meaning, and what they do on a daily basis they know fits with that bigger picture. So what can managers do to give people that sense of meaning in their work?
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the most important questions. And as you said, it's one of the 4 enablers in the Engage for Success movement. I mean, we sometimes talk about the golden thread, where you as an individual can see the link between what you are doing to what your wider team does and to what your wider organization does. So part of the manager's role is to make those connections that enable people to see that link between themselves and their job, bigger team, and the bigger purpose. And it's amazing, really. I've spent many years working with teams and organizations, all sorts of organizations. And if I'm doing a team building event, we'll often start with, well, what's the purpose of your team? Why does your team exist? What are you here for? And you'll be amazed that in any team, you'll get a number of different answers from the different individuals in that team. So people, even within the same team, will have very different ideas about why their team is there, why their team exists. So I think the starting point for a manager really is to articulate with your team what you're there for. What's the purpose of the team? What's your reason? Why are you needed as a team? And then going on from there, how does your team fit into the bigger organization? How do you connect with other parts of the company to do whatever it is that you're trying to do? But then also at the level of the individual, how am I, in my job, what part do I play in the team achieving its purpose? And I think the manager is really key in enabling people to see those links. And I think if you can see those links, then you've got that sense of, yeah, my job's important. I'm worth, I have value. What I do has value. And I like being part of this organization. And then the manager can set sort of meaningful goals and, clarify people's roles and so on. I think another thing, actually, just thinking about it, I've seen most companies have team briefing systems, and often any individual manager, they'll get some sort of briefing from on high that they're meant to brief to their teams. But often they're full of management jargon. They're full of KPIs and all sorts of stuff. And I think a key part of a manager's role is to translate some of the more management jargon that comes down from on high into meaningful facts, information about people's own role and own department, own team. So so it's having a team purpose, seeing how it fits into the bigger purpose, but then also making it meaningful for the individual. Yeah.
And you've talked about some of the sort of core needs for autonomy, competence, and connection. Again, what practical advice can we give the listeners on how to enable people to meet those needs?
Okay, well, let's try and take them one at a time. So if we start with autonomy or freedom, most of us want to have some sense that we've got some choice and control over what we do and how we do it and when we do it. So if you can give people some choices, I think that's helpful to give them that sense of autonomy. I think another thing, often managers think, HR are insisting on job descriptions or goals and things just for bureaucracy. But actually, the purpose of those sorts of processes is to give people a framework within which they've got the freedom to operate. So, clarifying the goals and the roles, people then know, okay, this is the framework in which I can operate, and I've got freedom to go about my job however I want to within that. Of course, with hybrid working these days, there generally is more opportunity to give people a bit more choice over when they work and how they work. And I think the other thing managers don't do enough is delegate areas of responsibility to people. So they can, and that develops them, of course, as well, and give them opportunities to be involved in new things or new projects or different initiatives. Of course, you need to support people if you're going to do that and check back with them how things went and what they learned from it. And often I think people imagine there are things stopping them acting. There's, we can't do that because, it might infringe some company rule or regulation. So I think managers can help sort of clarify some of those barriers that stop people acting of their own accord. Does that all make sense?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And when you say about HR bureaucracy or barriers, I do think often people can get to the situation where they sort of quote the fact that they can't do this because HR says that, or it's not possible, as you say, because that process doesn't exist or whatever. And it's often something that people have just sort of made up. It sort of feels like that ought to be what the excuse is or the reason is, but actually in reality, it's the managers are getting you to do the things that you need to do to run the business, serve the clients, and so on. And the rest of it, as you say, is there to support and enable. It's not supposed to be there to stop.
No, that's right. Yeah. And then, so that's autonomy. Then on competence, I'm a big believer in one-to-ones. And prioritizing them, and a one-to-one needn't be a long, complicated discussion with paperwork. It can be as simple as, let's go and have a coffee. Let's sit down and have a chat for 10 minutes. How are things going? What's gone well this week? What didn't go so well? What have you got on next week? Any concerns about that? That sort of open conversation about what's happening for people. I think that's really important. It's really important. Actually, it's a way of building connection, of course, as well as building people's competence. So making one-to-ones more of a conversation. And also you get to know people better, what's going on in their lives, you can build more empathy with them by having these sorts of conversations. Again, rather than seeing it as HR bureaucracy, it's making it just human, really. Obviously, from a competence point of view, you're looking at, well, what are people's strengths? Am I using their strengths? Are they getting the chance to use what they really enjoy and do well? And another thing is that to bear in mind is that people perform better when they feel confident. So I think a key role of a manager is building people's confidence. And confidence is why football teams perform better when they have a home match than when they're away, because the support of the crowd gives them that confidence, and then they perform better, they're more competent. So I think, managers need to bear in mind that as long as people's performance is reasonable, then you should give about 5 times the amount of positive feedback as negative feedback, because that builds people's self-belief. They're more confident and they perform better. Other things you can do, I call it a do and review approach. So when somebody does something, maybe they've gone to a meeting for you, or maybe they've produced a piece of work or a report, it's worth just sitting down with them and doing what I call do and review. How did it go? What's good about this? What went well? What didn't go so well? What should you do differently next time? And it just makes learning and development part of the normal job, rather than something that's extra or only happens, once a year at appraisal time. And then, praising people, showing appreciation. Personality differences come in here a little bit, because it often, for some of us, including me, it's a lot easier to point out somebody's mistakes than show appreciation for what they've done. But sometimes, you have to bite your tongue and don't criticize, but instead show that appreciation and that encouragement. And then on connection, that's the third area, maybe the most important one. In terms of our core needs, human beings, we have this need to feel that we belong and we're connected with others. So, and that's, we spend a lot of time at work. So people need to feel that at work as well as outside work. So have times when you bring all the team together. in person. That's a bit more complicated for people who are working partly from home, but try and schedule times when you're all going to be in and you can get together. If you're having a lot of online meetings, then make perhaps 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, or start the meeting early so people can have a quick chat about what's happening, what they've been doing. So that, opening calls 15 minutes early, that sort of thing. I would say if you're going to have a difficult conversation, always use face-to-face. Don't try having a difficult conversation online. Try and meet in person if you can.
Yeah.
Encouraging friendships, showing empathy, showing support for people, asking what they're doing outside work, all that general sort of rapport building and chit chat that we do is a really important part of building some of those connections and getting to know people, and also encouraging people within your team to get to know each other. I mean, that's as important as you getting to know them if you're a manager. So those are some. I think they all sound obvious, but we often don't make time for them.
No. And so let's just think about managers in this, creating this environment, if you like. What impact does a management style have on this? How do managers do this well, and how do they maybe not do it well, depending on who they are?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really good point. And how you communicate with other people does reflect your personality. So, for example, some of us are naturally more extroverted, have more to say, we're more chatty, we make connections easily with people. Some of us are more introverted, like to think before we speak, tend to keep our thoughts to ourselves before we've worked them out, before sharing them. So even that very basic difference between people can create misunderstandings, say, or make it more difficult. So I think as a manager, there's two things here. One is be aware of your own style, particularly in terms of that core difference of being more extroverted or more introverted, but also then be aware of what your people need. Some of your team will want you to be more chatty and talkative, and whereas others in your team will want a bit more space and time for reflection and quiet. So it's recognizing those individual differences and recognizing what your own style is. But I think the other important thing to remember is that while we tend to have a default style, we tend to behave in one particular way rather than another way, we can and we do flex our behavior depending on the situation. So, how we behave is not fixed in stone. It's not just determined by personality. You always have a choice in how you behave depending on the situation and the person that you're dealing with. So, I mean, to give an obvious example, if you're talking to your team about, the Christmas party, you're going to have a different style than if you're talking to them about or announcing redundancies or something. If you're announcing redundancies, you're going to be focused, calm, serious, show that you've thought through everything. If you are talking about the Christmas party, you're going to be more upbeat, more outgoing, more expressive. We do these, we make these differences. We do these things naturally in a way, but we often don't think about, well, what would be the most appropriate style for a particular situation and how am I coming across at the moment? It's about emotional intelligence, really. And one of the ways when I coach people, one of the ways I encourage them to think about it is matching their style of communication to the intention that they've got. So usually when we communicate with other people, we have a positive intention. We don't usually set out to be, awkward or difficult or unpleasant. But sometimes the way we come across can have a negative impact. Then we don't have the influence that we want. We don't have the impact that we want. So taking a moment to think before you communicate about, what am I trying to achieve here? What's my intention? What would be a good outcome from this conversation or this meeting or this presentation? Thinking in advance about that. Okay, so that's what I want to achieve. Therefore, what do I need to say? How do I need to say it? What sort of style approach shall I use? Helps, makes it more likely that you will get the result that you're hoping to get. So thinking, it's really about behaving in an emotionally intelligent way. It's about knowing what your default style is, but being able to flex it when needed and thinking about, well, what impact do I want to have? And I think, for managers and leaders, what you do and say is observed all the time by the people around you.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
we talk about being authentic and being natural, and that is important. But you do sometimes, as a manager, if maybe you've had a really terrible night, maybe your baby's kept you up all night, maybe you've had an argument with your partner or whatever, but the next day you've got to come into work and perhaps be upbeat, because how you behave will have an impact on how the rest of your team feels. I mean, there's different
mm,
ways of looking
mm.
at that, but I think the point I'm trying to make is you have to be conscious. You have to make conscious choices about how you behave
Yes,
in the circumstances and depending on who you're dealing with.
yes, yeah, yeah. So let's think about how things are sort of changing with hybrid working that's come in. So the workplace has changed. We've got more generations in the workplace than ever before, and obviously including those younger generations too. And
Mm.
do they have different expectations, and what does that mean for managers in terms of competencies and how they behave now and moving forward?
Yeah, well, there's a whole probably a whole load of issues there. You could probably have a whole radio show just on that one question. But yeah, first of all, obviously, since the pandemic, there's been far more remote working. So you have to make much more effort to connect with people so that they feel part of the organization. I know of one person, she's in her early 30s. She changed job last year to a new organization. She has never met any of her colleagues in person. All her work is from home. And so if you're in that situation, you feel less connection to your team, to the organization, you're more likely to leave.
Mm,
You don't have those ties, those social ties that bind you to each other. So yeah, as a manager, if you've got people working from home or hybrid working in your team, you've got to make much more effort to connect with people and enable them to connect with each other. And I didn't say earlier, I meant to say that, sometimes I've come across managers who say, oh, I don't do one-to-ones because my team don't want them. Oh, I asked Fred, did he want to have
mm,
a one-to-one this week? And he said, no, you should never do that. You should always have your discussion, your chat, your one-to-one, even if it's your 5 minutes. How are things going? Anything I can help you with? Okay, fine, nothing. It's showing that interest and concern in people is so important. I've slightly
mm,
gone off
mm,
the point there, going back over what we talked about earlier. But yeah, so first of all, hybrid working, you've got to make more effort than you used to. When you're in online meetings, you've got to think about how you're coming across. People say, oh, you can't tell people's body language when you're online. I disagree with that. If you're faced with a whole gallery of faces all facing you, you can see people's body language. You can see if people are engaged, disengaged, bored, doing something else on their phone, doing their emails. And if you allow those things to go on, it brings the whole team down. It affects morale, it affects motivation. So, thinking about how you do your remote communication is really important. And
mm,
then you mentioned generations. Yeah, I think Generation Z, they want managers to be more supportive and more empathic. And I think they're more concerned about the environment and about working for more sustainable organizations and so on. So as a manager, you've got to think about how do I perhaps behave differently. It's much less command and control now from managers and much more need to be supportive. So, it's less about checking up on whether people have done their work, completed their tasks, probably. I mean, that's important, don't get me wrong. Doing your work is really important. But it's more, I think, about enabling self-motivation, giving people that support, enabling them to feel fulfilled at work. I think it's much more about that. And the
mm,
other thing
mm,
is with generations, I realised, I only thought about this the other day, with people retiring later, you can have a 50-year age difference between people in your team, between the
mm,
youngest and the oldest. So that
mm.
means you might have to communicate with different individuals differently as well. Did
Yes,
you also asked about the competencies, didn't you, for the future?
for the future. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I'm terribly future orientated, but for me, I think really important now and into the next few years anyway is engaging people to give them that sense of meaning in their work along the lines we've been talking about, so that they do feel, I'm valued at work, my work that I do is important, and I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. Developing people to build their competence. Developing doesn't necessarily mean being promoted. It can mean just doing your current role better, or having new aspects of your job to do, or expanding your role. We all like to feel that we're competent. Nobody wants to go into work and feel that they've done a bad job. We all like to feel that we're competent and respected for our talents. Delegating is important, to give people that sense of freedom and autonomy we were talking about. And I've probably spent quite a lot of time talking about connections, but connecting and making connections between people so that they have that sense of belonging, which is, so important to us as human beings, really. So I think those will continue to be important, in the years to come, despite AI, and what AI might bring or not bring.
Yes, yeah. Lovely. So we've just got a few more minutes, maybe 3 minutes or so. What do you hope people are going to take away from this episode?
I think it would be how important the role of the people manager is. What you do and say, in other words, how you engage and connect with your team, has a big impact on how they think and how they feel. And how they think and feel affects how motivated they are, how well they perform, and affects their well-being as well. So it's, you're in a really important role, and so be conscious of what you do and say and the impact it's having. You're in a sort of privileged position, really, with the power to influence other people's lives, not just at work, but you influence by how you treat people, you influence their well-being too, and that of course spills over into their home lives. So it's a really important role if you're a people manager, and so it's important to do it as well as you can, and do it in your own way. There's no blueprint. We don't all have to do it in exactly the same way. Do it in a way that fits you, fits your personality, fits your style, but do it as well as you can.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much for your time today. Let people know how they can find out more about you and get in touch.
Oh, right. Thank you. So I do have a website, www.essenwood.co.uk. That's ESSENwood.co.uk. And there's lots of free resources about different personality styles, about motivation, about communication on there, including downloadable templates. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And my books are available in all good bookshops and on Amazon. So I hope people will connect with me in various ways.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jo. It's been great talking to you. Bye.
And just let you know, next week, Jo Moffat is back, and she's talking with Matthew Olenuik, and they're talking about why big government projects fail and what leaders can do about it.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.